Biker Mice from Mars might well be the greatest name for a show, like ever, but it was also a fantastic animated series that delighted kids around the world. Even after almost 3 decades since its release, fans still discuss the cartoon to this very day. As a result, we want to take a look at 8 of the best hidden details about this show. So, without further ado, let's rock and ride! Think you'll never see Throttle, Moto, and Vinny riding with Ghost Rider on the big screen? Well, it could happen. Originally, Biker Mice from Mars was created by Marvel Productions. Heck, its creator Rick Unger was the president of that studio, and later the CEO of Marvel Entertainment. Plus, Biker Mice also holds the distinction of having Stan the Man Lee as its executive producer. So whilst Unger might hold the rights for the show, he could still work out a deal with his former employees to license the Biker Mice into, say, the MCU, for example. But Unger seems to be more interested in politics nowadays, so who knows if that'll ever happen.
Let's rock and roll.
Whilst the Biker Mice might feel as American as it comes, it actually wasn't produced in the States. Due to the high labor costs in the US, about 90% of all cartoons ended up being produced in Asia, namely the Philippines. Most showrunners found that Filipinos understood American culture and produced outstanding animation for a fraction of the price. Whether that's a good or bad thing, though, is a discussion that's open for debate. The way it would work would be the following. The studio would send storyboards and voice tracks to the Philippines. The artist would then draw and paint about, get this, 20,000 sketches, mostly by hand, for every half-hour episode. Then they'd send it back for the sound effects and music to be added. So the next time you watch an episode of Biker Mice, take a moment to appreciate what the artist had to go through to produce this. With so much attitude dripping in each episode, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the Biker Mice were inspired by a bunch of Harley riders on the open road. Well, that's kind of half a story here. Creator Rick Unger told the Los Angeles Times where the influence for the show actually came from. He said, "My wife and I were having brunch when all of a sudden about 25 Harleys roared up, but you could see these guys were yuppies." Unger added that the Ninja Turtles were also another obvious inspiration. However, he felt the Biker Mice possessed enough humor to appeal to an older audience, whilst the Turtles were strictly for kids. But to think that the Biker Mice from Mars was probably inspired by a bunch of middle-aged bankers on a Saturday ride? Yeah, you know what they say about when inspiration strikes, right? Come on. The Turtles loved heavy metal and catchphrases. The Biker Mice loved heavy metal and catchphrases. It's pretty obvious to see that the influence runs pretty deep here. But there's even a bigger influence here at play. Rob Paulsen voiced Throttle in Biker Mice, and he's widely renowned for bringing Raphael to life in the Ninja Turtles animated show. Of course, Paulsen's adventures with the Turtles didn't stop there, and he went on to voice Donatello in the 2012 reboot. Mind you, Paulsen is responsible for voicing most of our favorite childhood characters, so it should be no surprise that he played a big part in making the Biker Mice come to life here. In the 90s, most cartoons copied each other. If someone found a successful formula, everyone repeated it. But the most blatant example of 2 shows being literally cut and paste was Biker Mice and its UK counterpart, Avenger Penguins. Now, we're not going to debate which show came first, but they're literally the same premise. That being said, there's simply no way you can dislike a show about bike riding penguins. It's simply impossible. But hey, as fans, at least we got to see more shows where animals ride around on motorbikes, right? Every cartoon had its own toy line, but to complete the trinity of joy, they'd need to have a video game too. Biker Mice from Mars wasn't exempt from this, receiving its own racing title on the Super NES. It received mostly generous reviews, and it was expected to be ported to the Sega Mega Drive. Unfortunately, it just never happened. You see, the show changed production companies and distributors across the 3 seasons, so by the time the game was meant to be ported to the Mega Drive in 1995, the show was speeding towards cancellation. As a result, Nintendo did what Sega don't in this scenario. Yeah, this is a bit of a shocker, even if both shows are centered around rats, both figuratively and literally. But the connection is much deeper than you think. For one, Ian Ziering was the voice of Vinny on the show, so he must have told his fellow co-stars about how cool the experience was, because suddenly the cast from Beverly Hills 90210 started popping up on the cartoon. From the likes of Luke Perry and Jason Priestley to even Jenny Garth and Tori Spelling. Sheesh, talk about a reunion here. Speaking of Ian Ziering, he was such a fan of the series that he even returned to voice the character in the 2006 revival, which we'll be talking about next.
So, what do you say, Don? Want to watch me stomp some goons?
Look, the Biker Mice had a decent run the first time out. 65 episodes across 3 seasons is nothing to sniff at. In fact, most 90s shows wish they'd had as much time to do their thing. Yet, it got a second chance at continuing the story in 2006 with a 1-season revival. Whilst it didn't quite have the same impact and legacy as the OG series, it still introduced the next generation of fans to these 3 mice with slick rides. Also, most people remember this run for the timed PlayStation 2 game, which was pretty rubbish, as well as the Nintendo DS version. And still, Sega felt like it was on the outside looking in here. So tell us, did you dig the Biker Mice from Mars? And are you hoping for a reboot in the future? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thanks for tuning in.